All right, next up we've got Nikolay Skolkov. Hi, Nikolay.
Hello, Chris. Nice to see you.
You too. So give us a little background on yourself.
I've been working at the agency of Wargaming for almost 6 years, and my duty is visual effects and render farm pipeline management.
Excellent. So what are you going to be presenting on today?
I'm going to speak about the project we made last year. This is the music video for the famous Sweden band Sabaton, and I'd like to share with some tips that helped me to cope with some issues while working on this project.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Let's jump in.
Okay, let's go.
Hello everyone, it's me, and yes, I'm going to speak about a music video we made last year for famous Sweden metal band Sabaton. They define their genre as battle metal, so it perfectly corresponds with the biggest wargaming projects. I mean World of Tanks and World of Warships. The music video that I'm going to speak about was inspired by the story of German battleship Bismarck. On her first encounter with the enemy, she sank a British ship called Hood. By the way, we made this scene as well, but in another project. After this battle, Bismarck became a target for almost dozens of British ships, and they have been chasing Bismarck for 3 days, and in the final battle, they managed to sink her. In this project, we try to reconstruct some moments from those days. By the way, working on this project, we dove deep into history, and our historian consultants were going along with us through this project, and they were watching us if we doing everything right. Actually, this is a nice side effect of our job. While working on certain projects, we also get to know a lot of interesting information. This project consists of both shots taken with real camera and computer-generated ones. My duty on this project was making dynamic water, a lot of water, close-ups and distance, and it was very challenging for me because, in my opinion, water is the most complicated effect ever, because we see water every day, and that's why every non-realistic behavior of computer-generated water is very prominent, and mostly it regards close-up shots. Most of the shots with water are just ordinary flip simulations. There is nothing special, but there is one shot that I would like to focus on for this presentation. This shot shows us sinking Bismarck and a group of sailors trying to survive. They are swimming as far from the ship as they can, and they are making a lot of splashes. So these splashes must be made for each sailor in the water. The first thought that came to my mind was just placing all sailors in the same container as the sinking ship, simulated usual way, and get a standard white water layer. But the obvious problem has appeared. All these sailors are very small in comparison to the ship, and the resolution of this container was really insufficient to produce such teeny splashes. But the most horrible thing was that I've almost wasted all time allocated for water effects. So in these circumstances, I had to invent something really fast, something that could be simulated faster, something that gives faster feedback while iterating. So one and single answer was just try to use particles. And in the next section, I'll guide you through the steps I made on this way. But before we start, I'd like to show what I've got at the end. Here is the ocean patch and the crowd of sailors swimming. Firstly, let's take a look on what I had as an input. I had a crowd of sailors, which each sailor is a packet agent, and I have ocean spectra in BGO file. Since this is just a set of volumes, it's more convenient for us to keep it on server in BGO format. Okay. But it seems that this crowd been already simulated with another ocean, but it's not a problem. I'm still able to use mine. I just need to put it back, put them back to 0 along y-axis, and I will apply my ocean spectra to the points that represent each sailor, and now they are placed along the surface. But there may be an issue. I'll show you. Just imagine a wave of that shape, and it may happen then. It may happen when a point representing packet agent may appear somewhere here, and the sailor will appear something like that as well, but it's not normal. And to fix this issue, I will sample some points within some radius, points from the ocean surface, in order to find some average position where the sailor will be placed, and it will definitely look much better. Firstly, I merge into this object the surface, which is here, and what will I do? I will take geometry from the second input. I will use P for position. I will start search from the position of each agent. I will search within radius of 0.5, and I will search for 20 points, and those 20 points will be sampled into the one value that will be written to average position outpost variable. And then each then y component of each agent's position will be set to the y component of the average position I have just found. And this corrects the position a bit. Not so prominent, but I may be sure that no one of the sailors will appear on the very peak of the wave. Okay, and so what would I do next? I will isolate one of them, and I will set up all simulation only for this guy, and as soon as I'm satisfied with this simulation, I will then use my render farm, and I will calculate this simulation for each sailor in the same time, and this is the great advantage of using render farms. But I need to do one more thing. I must create a personal ocean patch for this sailor that may be smaller. I have created another object container where all simulation will happen, and I take my sailor here, and I have created a grid that is connected to the geometry I have in this node with some expressions. I just take centroid of this geometry and use it for x position of x and z position of this grid. So this grid will follow my sailor everywhere he will going to. And how big this grid must be depends only on how much foam do you want to stay on the surface. In my case, I don't want much foam, so it's enough 5 by 5 units grid. It's enough for me. Now I have one sailor and its own personal ocean patch that moves along with the sailor. And let's set up an emitter for particles. First of all, I must decide where particles must be emitted. The most obvious place is the areas where sailor's surface intersects water surface. And also I must define how many particles must be emitted and how fast they must fly. The sailor is waving with his arms and legs, so I will emit particles in the areas where the sailor hits the water. In order to define where to emit more particles, I will measure velocity on all sailors' mesh. So I will know what body parts of the sailors move faster, and that's why it will generate more splashes. I will use trail soap in compute velocity mode. This soap compares points position in neighbor frames and calculates how this position changes and that the velocity is. But there is an issue I must pay attention to, because floating on ocean waves, the whole body moves up and down, and there is an additional velocities appears on every part of the body. In order to avoid that, I will place this packet agent to zero position in all axes, and it will be allowed only rotate and waving with hands and legs in being in place. So I will have clean velocity that is related only moving points, only moving body parts. And then I may calculate the speed and copy this speed attribute. Speed is just a length of velocity vector, and just copy this attribute to the sailor, because actually this is the same mesh. The sailor which is floating and the sailor which is in zero position. So I will have speed attributes on all points of the sailor's body, and let's check it with color ramp. So you can see the faster points move, the more of a green color they are, and it's clearly seen that his arms and legs are moving fast, and his chest and head moving slower. So it's obviously that when he hit his hands on the water surface, it will create more splashes than somewhere in this area. Okay, and I will time blend all animation, because later in my dynamic simulation I will use more than one substep, so I need this sailor to be calculated, the position of these points be calculated in in subframes, between frames. So the next step, we'll find an intersection line. This is being made with Boolean SOP in mode of sim. It finds intersection between input 1 and input 2 and create polygonal line where the surfaces intersect. And the next step, I will transfer the speed attribute from the sailor to this polyline. I just make an resample. So I have more points and they are distributed more evenly in space. And I will create normals on the surface, on the sailor's surface, and normals on the ocean surface. I will need it later when I will compute the velocities and the direction for particles. Well, I'd like my particles to be emitted out of the surface. So I must do some vector math to get what I want. And but before, I'd like to illustrate it with some picture I have here. Yes, just imagine this is a surface ocean, and this is somebody that get into water, and the blue arrows is the normals from the surface, so from the water surface. These red arrows are the normals from the object, and I must calculate the direction of which the particles will be spreaded, and I just need to get a sum of these vectors. So if I add this vector to this vector, I will get the green vector, the green arrow that represents the direction where splashes will be spreaded, and the same on the other side. So I do this with a couple of operators here. I take point cloud, I take geometry with points from second input. This is the geometry of sailor. Then I take geometry from the third input. It's a geometry of ocean, and get normals from both. Then I edit. This vector is added with this vector, and I get this vector. Add some noise. In this noise, add noise in direction, and this noise, add noise in length of a vector or its magnitude. I clamp it to certain values because I don't want it to be too strong, and multiply this vector with some noise and get the resultant vector, which can be seen here. So we may try to look to this vector without any noise applied. Here you can see that all vectors for particle emission directs in right direction out of the body, and this is exactly what I want, but in order to be to make my splashes more natural, I will add a bit of noise. But besides of noise, I will get speed attribute from the polylines and fit it to between 0 and 1, and I will multiply the all vectors on this with this ramp parameter, so I will get splashes where the sailor hits the water with his hands and legs, and I will have no speed for particles in the areas where his body lies. So I have my polyline with velocity on its points, and I may use this polyline as source of my particles. Here I have created a simple dot network to test it, and I have the source geometry on the first input, and I will emit. My particle emission will be based on the emit attribute. Let's move to the frame 55 and we'll see what it will be. Let's take a look on this. This is beautiful, no doubts, but it is not that I need. It doesn't look like water splash, but maybe if I add some more noise to velocity and make the source points to jitter more, I would get another kind of emission, but the best solution in this case would be emission from volume rather than from polylines, because being scattered inside volume, particles will be distributed more evenly in space, and its emission will be more natural and more splashy. I will create these volumes with the volume rasterized attribute separator. It takes some point attribute and fill volume voxel at this point's position with attribute value. In my case, I create two VDB volumes, one for emission, emit volume, and another one for storing velocity. And all of this volumes is created out of from attributes, which is created here. I've already spoken about velocity, and I also create here the emit attribute. I just take speed attribute from polyline. I feed it to the range of between 0 and 1, and remap it with my run parameter. So let me show you how it works, and let's check. I use a color operator to paint polyline according to emit parameters, so it will be painted from red to green according to the value of the emit attribute. So you can see where the polyline has higher speed, and this is painted in green color. So it means that here there will be emission, and the red areas there will be any emission at all. And based on the value of this parameter, the volume rasterized attribute operator creates corresponding volumes, and you can see it creates source volume right in that places where I have green areas. And one more little thing that I have done, I just lift a bit my source above the surface on very teeny value. I've done it because I don't want that some of particles will appear underwater at once. So I like all of them to be emitted above the surface. Okay, I got my source ready, and in the next section I will describe my DOP network. So let's dive inside DOP. As you can see, it's very simple. The particles are sourced from volume, and since it cannot inherit velocity from the source because we are sourcing from volume, and I will use this operator pop advect by volumes, and it will affect only on particles from the newborn group. This is a group that contains particles that were born in the current substep, and in the next substep they will be removed from this group. That is the way I can set up initial velocity from for particles. The particle is born, then while being in newborn group it takes velocity from volume, and in the next substep it loosely flies away, being affected only by gravity. The volume with velocity I will take from the first context geometry. This is it, and as you can see we have volume for emit, and volume named V with velocity data. These volumes are 0 so far because we only on the first frame of my timeline. And of course there are no emission volume and velocity volumes, but it will appear. They will appear when something will happen on the network above. So, and but how to deal with particles that dive into the water? There are a lot of ways to do that, but the most common way is based on sampling volumes that may present both in ocean setup and flip simulations. In my case, I just sample this volume. I get to know if certain particle got underwater and how deep below the surface it is. This information is enough for me. But if you want to build more complicated behavior for underwater particles, you will probably need a bit more information. For example, you may sample volumes for gradient or import velocity either from flip simulation or ocean setup. But before I can sample the volume from ocean, I must turn it on in ocean evaluate node. Here, and this is the usual volume. I can set up dimensions for this volume, and this volume will be attached. This center of this volume will be attached to center of the grid via expression, and I can have it here. I delete everything but this volume, and I have surface SDF volume, and this geometry will be merged into subsolver here. This subsolver will execute each substep for each particle. In this case, it changes particle's velocity if it's needed. Here I have input geometry from dot network, and here I get surface SDF volume, and I have a simple setup inside. I sample volume and check if I got negative number, it means that a particle got underwater and I need to do something with its velocity. In parallel, I will negate this sample, build a vector where the sample from volume will be y component. I multiply this vector by 10, and this switch operator just select if particle is underwater. It choose the second input, where I force particle to move up, and the velocity of this particle became equal of this velocity, or if particle is still above the water, this network will do nothing with velocity, and that particle that is above the water, it moves only being affected by its own velocity and the gravity force. At this stage, I will save particles and try to render. So let's do it. Now I have splash for one sailor. There are several ways for rendering splashes, but since VDB volumes were implemented in Houdini, it became more natural to use a volume-based approach. Actually, the water being mixed up is very close to volume in sense of light traversing. On the other hand, unlike volumes, it must have reflections and specular, which depend on surface normals. I will create both volume and normals out of these points. But before, I'll do small position correction. Firstly, I create a group named underwater that will contain points that get on the water surface. I will check special attribute underwater that I have created inside Soap Solver. Here. Each point that gets under the surface will have this attribute set to 1. And I can check these points and select all of them. Then I will use ray operator. This operator will move all underwater points closer to surface. It will place it along the surface. Because some of the points haven't got to the surface due to some reasons. I guess it is because of low resolution of ocean volume, maybe. Anyway, this array operator will fix all of these errors. On the next step, I will set point scale. It will depend of normalized age. And I will create a ramp. So my particles is born with the radius of 0.01, and as they get older, they get smaller as well. And I just make this change more smooth. And the next I will replicate the points. Instead of 1 point, I will get 10. Let's see it somewhere here. Now I have 1 point, and here it's being substituted with 10 points. But besides this, the area where each point will be replicated will be stretched according to the original point's velocity attribute. This will mimic the behavior of flying water blob. It always tends to stretch or even tear apart. Next, I will create a volume. It can be done by rasterizing point density attribute, or just using this operator, VDB from particle fluid. I have used exactly this operator because it has almost similar controls like particle fluid surface, but it creates SDF volume. I need fog, so I convert SDF to fog, and I need normals. To get normals for volume, I must calculate volume gradient. What the volume gradient is, I show you. I have nice peaks head here. I create volume, and I create a point somewhere in space. I will transform it, and I will sample this volume at the position of this point, and I will take the gradient of the volume at this position and write it to the normal of the point, and I will turn points in viewport, and let's make it more visible. Okay, and when I move this point inside volume, it is sampling the gradient inside this volume, and as you can see, this gradient always point inside. So the volume gradient is the vector that points to the direction where volume increases. I have this volume, and I calculate gradient at every voxel of this volume. So I have another volume. It's vector volume that holds gradient values, and I may check these values visually. I create a bunch of points inside volume, and I will sample gradient from the volume to each of these points. So you can see that all gradient vectors are pointing inward, and that not the same as normal. If I want them to act like normal, I must negate it. I just multiply this vector by -1 and I get new gradient vectors that look like normals. The same thing I'm doing here. I have gradient and I negate it. And merge all together. So I have density and gradient volumes. And the last question, what shader to use? Of course, you may experiment with your own, but I took basic white water shader from standard materials palette. It has both volume layer and PBR reflect layer that may produce speculars according to the data in my gradient field. So let's make test render. Well, not bad. I have volume inside and I have specular here, and I like it, and I may use my render farm to simulate splashes for each sailor. In the final section, I'd like to say a couple of words about distributing simulation on HQ farm. Firstly, I must set up wedges in my scene. Wedge allows me to variate any parameter in the scene in automatic mode, and I can either generate random numbers or specify certain range of values for certain parameter. And of course, the most fashionable way to do this would be using brand new Houdini context, task operators, and PDG, but I have not yet set up my farm for using that stuff. That's why I still use old style wedging, and I create wedge operator. As I've said, it generates numbers starting from 0, and this number goes to this parameter here, and the delete node will delete all agents but the agent whose primitive number equals this parameter. Of course, the personal ocean patch will be created automatically, and of course it will follow a specific sailor. I also specify render operator. It will save all my geometry data in my project folder, and besides that, it will create subfolders according to the variable wedgenum. This is the number of current wage. And to set all these jobs to my farm, I use HQ simulation operator. I specify everything I need, what output driver I will use, where is my server, and where is my Houdini on each computer, and the partitioning type I will use will be wedges. So I may save my scene and try to submit job. Here's my job. It has generated 14 wages, which is individual simulation for specific sailor, and it will also be saved in the same time. Let's look what I've got. I've got 14 folders. Each contains the geometry sequence for specific sailor, and it must be loaded into Steam. I use file merge node. This node can use several sequences at once, and I want it to load sequences from folders starting from folder 0 to folder 13, and I must specify here the variable slice that is automatically created by this node. Here you can see all splashes have been loaded, and I can start rendering all scene. That's all. Thank you for listening till the end. It wasn't easy, I know. And if you have questions, you may ask it using my email. Bye.